She gave me 72 hours to dismantle my own home. No knock at the door, no advance letter, no attempt at a conversation. Just a printed ultimatum slapped crookedly against my cabin door, paired with a smile that told me she'd already played this moment through in her head and liked the ending. You know that smile, pleasant on the surface, icy underneath, the kind worn by someone who's been waiting a long time to finally say, "I'm the one in control now." I stood there reading the notice once, then again, then a third time, hoping I'd miss something. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe the caffeine hadn't hit yet. But it wasn't. According to the Homeowners Association, my cabin was suddenly non-compliant. And if I didn't willingly tear down the so-called violations myself, they would move forward with enforced compliance. 72 hours. That's how long she gave me before trying to erase my life. And that's when it hit me. This was no longer about regulations. My name is Daniel Hart. I'm 58 years old. And until a few years ago, I spent most of my adult life working as a county land inspector in Northern California. 35 years of walking property boundaries, reading zoning codes, and mediating disputes that always seem minor, right up until they destroy someone's peace. When I retired, I believed I'd earned something most people never get: silence, space. I inherited my father's lakeside cabin in a place called Silverwood Cove, a quiet pocket of land wrapped around a small lake, ringed with pine trees, the kind of place where mornings smell like wet soil and aged wood. My father bought the land back in the mid-1980s, all 50 acres, with a hopeful vision of building a modest, respectful community where neighbors actually knew one another. For a long time, that vision held. People waved as they passed. Kids rode bikes until the sky turned orange. No one cared if you hung laundry outside or planted vegetables wherever the sun hit. The HOA technically existed, but it was more suggestion than authority. Then Cassandra Blake arrived, early 50s, razor-sharp haircut, even sharper voice, always carrying a clipboard like it was fused to her spine. Within a year, she positioned herself as HOA president. Almost overnight, Silverwood Cove stopped feeling like a neighborhood and started feeling like it was under watch. Laundry lines were suddenly unsightly. Exterior paint required approval. Landscaping changes, even flowers, needed written permission. Uniformity, she called it, community standards. Most people complied, not because they agreed, but because Cassandra mastered intimidation without ever raising her voice. She smiled while issuing fines. She quoted bylaws like holy text, and she made sure everyone knew she was just enforcing the rules. I'd dealt with her type before, which is probably why I didn't think twice about planting that sunflower. It wasn't symbolic at first, just a seed dropped into the dirt one morning, because I liked the idea of something bright greeting me when I stepped onto the porch. No protest, no statement, just a flower. She showed up the next afternoon. Clipboard, smile, sunglasses hiding whatever calculation was happening behind her eyes. "Daniel," she said sweetly, "I'm going to need you to submit a landscaping request." I told her calmly that it was my property, and I'd planted a single sunflower. That's when her smile changed. It didn't fade, it stiffened. "Well," she said, tapping her pen against the board, "we'll see about that." The fines started arriving quickly after that. $200 for improper vehicle placement. My old pickup hadn't moved in 3 years. $300 for unauthorized construction, a wooden fishing chair by the lake. $150 for non-compliant exterior appearance. My cabin had been natural since before Cassandra ever heard of this place. Each notice was written just threatening enough to keep you uneasy. Escalating enforcement, community standards, legal consequences. I began documenting everything. Old habit. 35 years in the field teaches you that paperwork tells the real story. Photos, dates, times, copies of every notice. I added a couple of security cameras too, mostly for peace of mind. That's when Cassandra escalated. She called an emergency HOA meeting and didn't invite me. At that meeting, she painted me as unstable, dangerous, a problem resident who refused to cooperate. Suddenly, people I'd shared cookouts with wouldn't look at me. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid me. One woman stopped letting her grandkids play near my place. Cassandra didn't just find me, she isolated me. Then she called the police and claimed I'd threatened her. The officers were professional. They reviewed my footage. They saw exactly what happened. Me standing on my porch, asking questions, getting flustered. No threats, no aggression. The report went nowhere, but squad cars in your driveway leave scars. And she made sure everyone knew. Not long after that, I came home to find my mailbox gone, replaced with a flimsy post and another violation notice. The community landscaping crew trimmed branches off my oak tree on my property, claiming encroachment. Every move hovered just inside legality, or so she believed. The breaking point came on a Saturday. I returned from town to find my fence destroyed, my garden trampled, and the sunflower gone, cut clean at the base. The cameras caught everything. Cassandra standing there, directing the crew, saying, "He needs to learn his place." Taped to my door was a final notice. 72 hours. That night, sitting alone in my cabin, staring at the empty patch of dirt where the sunflower had been, I didn't feel angry. I felt focused. Because according to standard procedure, once someone crosses from harassment into property destruction, the rules shift. And Cassandra had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Now pause here for a moment, because this is where people get confused, and where people like Cassandra rely on that confusion. A homeowners association doesn't own your house, or your autonomy, no matter how confidently someone waves a clipboard. An HOA is a contract, nothing more. Its authority depends on written limits, clearly defined powers, and due process. Remove any one of those, and the whole structure starts to wobble. Legally speaking, there are 3 immediate red flags. First, fines issued without proper notice or an appeal process. Second, enforcement actions taken without board votes or documented approval. And third, and this one matters most, entering or altering private property without the owner's consent. At that point, it stops being an HOA issue. It becomes property damage. And psychologically, this is where Cassandra's behavior fully exposes itself. This was a trap built on escalation and isolation. She wasn't trying to win a disagreement. She was trying to break resistance. She was trying to wear me down. Fine after fine. Neighbor after neighbor slowly turning their backs. The police visit. The mailbox. The tree. Every move was designed to shrink you, to make you feel monitored, isolated, and powerless. The goal is simple. Exhaust someone until compliance feels like relief. People like her survive on authority that goes unchallenged. They start small, testing limits with minor rules, then push further once they realize no one is resisting. And the instant someone does resist, that person becomes a problem. The danger, the example. The irony is that the more aggressively someone enforces power they don't actually have, the more obvious it becomes how fragile their control really is. Which brings us back to the sunflower, and why cutting it down changed everything. That night, after the sunflower was destroyed, sleep never came. I sat at the small kitchen table with the lights off, the lake casting moonlight across the floor, replaying the footage again and again. Cassandra's voice was calm, almost bored, as if she were ordering lunch instead of directing 3 grown men to dismantle my property. He needs to learn his place. That sentence landed differently than anger. It brought clarity. Because legally, the moment she crossed into intentional property damage, this stopped being a petty HOA dispute and became something far more serious. A paper trail with consequences. And I knew exactly where it began. I went down to the basement and opened the old fireproof safe my father had kept for decades. Inside were documents I hadn't looked at in years. Faded maps, original surveys, and a lease agreement that made Silverwood Cove possible in the first place. I made one phone call. "Mark," I said when he answered, his voice still sharp at 72. "You remember that land deal from 86? There was a pause, then a laugh. "I was wondering when you'd finally need it." Mark Reynolds had been my father's real estate attorney. The kind of man who never forgot a clause and never wasted a comma. We met the next morning. 3 hours later, he leaned back in his chair with the grin of someone who just found a winning lottery ticket in an old winter coat. The lease allowed rent adjustments to fair market value with 30 days' notice. For nearly 40 years, the HOA had been paying $1 a year to lease 45 acres of prime lakeside land. $1. Current market value? Roughly $10,000 per acre per year. Do the math. While Cassandra had been busy finding people over paint shades and lawn height, she'd been sitting on a financial landmine without realizing who held the detonator. And we weren't finished. I started auditing. Old habits die hard. I pulled permits, financial disclosures, meeting minutes, and that's when things shifted from ugly to criminal. Unauthorized construction. The clubhouse and pool built without landowner consent. HOA fees doubled without member votes. $15,000 quietly funneled from community funds straight into landscaping at Cassandra's personal residence. Falsified minutes. Forged signatures. She wasn't just abusing authority. She was running the HOA like a personal checking account. The most unexpected piece fell into place one evening when there was a knock at my door. Her husband, Ethan Blake, stood there looking a decade older than the last time I'd seen him. He didn't ask to come in. He just handed me a USB drive, his hand shaking. "I can't do this anymore," he said. "She's gone too far." What was on that drive sealed everything. Emails, text messages, proof of vote manipulation, threats sent to residents who dared question her authority. He'd watched her change, and he was done protecting it. Within days, everything was in motion. Mark drafted the rent adjustment notice. I filed the property damage report, and I invoked my right under the bylaws to call an emergency HOA meeting. Every household received notice. So did a local investigative reporter known for covering HOA abuse cases. Cassandra called me within the hour, screaming, "You have no authority to do this." I let her finish, then calmly reminded her that any member could call an emergency session when the community's future was at risk. The night of the meeting was chaos. The hall overflowed. People packed the doorways. Even residents from neighboring communities showed up, drawn by rumors and camera crews. Cassandra arrived confident, binder in hand, ready to command the room like she always had. She didn't see the wave forming. I opened with one simple question. How many of you know who actually owns the land Silverwood Cove sits on? Blank stares, murmurs, confusion. I turned to Cassandra. "Would you like to explain?" She froze. So I did it for her. I introduced myself properly. Son of the original landowner, current leaseholder, the man who'd been charging the HOA $1 a year out of goodwill. The room went completely still. Then the footage played. Cassandra giving orders to tear down my fence. The sunflower, her voice saying, "Teach him his place." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Anger followed. Then the spreadsheets came up. Financial records. Forged signatures. Emails threatening families with fines, retaliation, and legal pressure. One by one, residents stood. Stories spilled out. Kids fined for playing. Seniors pressured into silence. Single parents choosing between groceries and HOA penalties. Cassandra tried to shout over them. "This is manipulation," she screamed. "I improved this community." "What exactly did you improve?" I asked quietly. Fear. That was the answer. The vote wasn't close. She was removed from every position, effective immediately. Then I laid down the final piece. Legally, I had the right to terminate the lease altogether, to dissolve the HOA, to force a reckoning no one was prepared for. But I didn't. Instead, I gave them a choice. New leadership, transparency, accountability. They chose wisely. Cassandra walked out without a word, and for the first time in years, the room exhaled. 2 years later, I'm sitting in the same wooden chair by the lake, the one Cassandra once tried to fine me for building. I'm watching kids run to the grass, laughing, shouting, staying out past 6 like it's the most ordinary thing in the world. And that's the point. It is ordinary, or at least it should be. Because this story was never really about a sunflower or fines, or even one power-hungry HOA president. It was about what happens when people confuse authority with dominance, rules with control, and leadership with fear. According to standard procedure, systems like HOAs exist to serve communities, not rule them. They're meant to manage shared responsibilities, roads, lighting, safety, not dictate how grown adults live their lives down to the color of a flower. But when oversight disappears and no one asks questions, those systems can quietly become playgrounds for people who crave control more than cooperation. From a legal standpoint, most HOA abuse survives on one simple assumption: that residents don't know their rights or don't have the energy to defend them. Cassandra wasn't betting on being right. She was betting on people being tired, overwhelmed, afraid to stand alone. And for a while, she was winning. This is a psychological trap many communities fall into when intimidation is spread evenly. A small fine here, a subtle threat there. No single incident feels big enough to fight. Everyone thinks, it's just me, I'll keep my head down. Until suddenly everyone's head is down, and one person is standing at the top of the hill, deciding what's acceptable. That's how fear turns into policy. What broke that cycle wasn't my background or the documents or even land ownership. Those were tools. What really changed things was sunlight, stories spoken out loud, neighbors realizing they weren't alone, that what they experienced wasn't isolated or deserved. Once that happened, Cassandra's power evaporated almost instantly. Today, Silverwood Cove is unrecognizable in the best possible way. HOA fees are lower and transparent. Rules are minimal and focus on safety, not appearances. Meetings are packed, not because people are afraid, but because they care. There's laughter again. Arguments too, sometimes, but honest ones, out in the open. We even planted a community garden. 15 families. One full row of sunflowers. Every year on the anniversary of that meeting, we call it Sunflower Day. No speeches. No ceremonies. Just neighbors planting, talking, kids getting dirt under their nails. A quiet reminder that something good grew out of something ugly. And if there's one thing I hope you take from this, it's this: power doesn't always announce itself by shouting. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it carries a clipboard. And sometimes the most dangerous sentence in a neighborhood is, "That's just how it is." It doesn't have to be. If you're dealing with an HOA or any system that feels more like a cage than a community, start with questions. Read the documents. Talk to your neighbors. Write things down. And don't underestimate how quickly imaginary authority collapses when it's challenged by calm, informed resistance. The real victory wasn't watching Cassandra leave. It was watching people stand together afterward. So I'll leave you with this, and I genuinely want to hear your thoughts. Have you ever lived somewhere that slowly stopped feeling like home because of rules, pressure, or someone abusing their position? And if you did, what finally made you push back? Drop your story in the comments, because the quietest people in the room are usually the ones holding the strongest ground.